Hi everyone, this is Robert with GoldSilverPros.com. It is January 27th, 2019, and this is your second edition of the weekly market wrap-up. Today I want to talk about what had been going on for the last week, and as you can see, the overall broad markets were up about 0.5% to about 0.8% for the week. Not a lot happening, not a lot of volatility this week. I think the market has started to settle down a little bit. It is the start of the earnings reports season for companies for Q4 of 2018 and also the guidance for what's going on in 2019. So I think the market is really waiting to digest that information before it makes any major moves. We're too early in that earnings season for us to get a feel for what it's going to be like, for what the overall results were for 2018 for the broad market, and for what management expects for 2019. I fully expect that they're going to say that there are rising costs, and while there have been profits, there's going to be more cost cutting, and some of that cost cutting is going to be coming in terms of people's jobs. However, I'll keep you updated on that as we go forward. As we get a little bit deeper into earnings seasons, I'll have a video on what exactly is going on broadly in the market. As the market has fallen, the stock markets have fallen over the Q4 of 2018. Gold and silver have both received strong bids. So gold has gone up. It peaked at about 1302 last week. Silver was up to about 1575 last week. Right now, and after hours trading, it's about 15.69. So gold and silver are getting bids. For those of you who have subscribed to my digest and my podcast, would know from the January 2019 subscriber digest that I predicted exactly this is what would happen for gold and silver. As there was more turbulence in the broad stock market and the prices came down, gold will go up. But I give very specific charts that will tell you exactly what to expect in the gold market and tell you exactly what drives the gold market. And so you know when to buy low and sell high in that market. If you're not a subscriber to this point, for GoldSilverPros.com paying subscriber, you may want to consider doing that if you're considering investing in the gold and silver market, because I can pretty much tell you when the prices are going to go up and go down based on a host of factors, which I've simplified very easily for you in January 2019's monthly subscriber digest, and I talked about in greater detail as we go back into the January 2019 precious metals broadcast. And as you listen to that, I will explain exactly how the gold market reacts. For those of you wondering about silver, I covered that in December 2018. Silver was the focus of 2018's broadcast, as well as the written publication, the subscriber digest for 2018 as well, where I basically graphed out the drivers for the silver market. Also in the podcast, I talk not only about silver, but I talk about gold, platinum, and palladium. For those of you who had listened to my podcast for December 2018 would know that I was talking about increases in palladium prices coming for the rest of 2018, December 2018, and early 2019. Well, let's look at a live palladium chart. I made this call right about this time frame, and as you can see, the price of palladium has increased substantially up to $13.66 an ounce, where it surpassed for the first time, maybe ever, but in a very, very long term, the price of gold. So why is palladium, which is typically considered the third most expensive of the four precious metals, platinum is usually most expensive historically, then you have gold, then you have palladium, then you had silver. Why is palladium now the most expensive metal? Well, a lot of that has to do with demand for auto catalytic market, and what is happening is there's so much demand for that across a wide variety of different cars. You know, as China is buying more cars and the emerging markets are buying more cars and need that palladium for the catalytic converters for those vehicles, it's driving up the price of palladium. And there's going to be a lag time between when platinum is substituted for palladium in that market, because platinum can be used for a lot of autolytic catalytic converter processes, though it cannot be used as broadly as palladium, and therefore the demand for platinum is always going to be slightly less than palladium for that purposes. Also because platinum has historically been the more expensive metal. Now that palladium is trading as a premium to platinum, what's going to happen is platinum is going to be substituted for palladium, but it can't be substituted in all cases. So I'll talk about and have talked about why palladium is going to get more expensive. That was in the subscriber digest. I predicted that, and if you had read that subscriber digest, you would have made quite a bit of money as a subscriber on the palladium price if you want to trade that. Moving on to the broad markets, there's a goofy article on CNBC that says, if the debt markets get crazy again, the U.S. debt, Japanese yen, and gold could be the three best safe havens. and is basically saying that gold is third place in terms of safe havens behind U.S. debt and Japanese yen. I just want to comment on that because that's really incredibly stupid. U.S. debt has reached all-time levels in history, and it's debt. It's not an asset, meaning the U.S. government has to pay it back. In order to pay back all the debt that they've issued, they basically would have to print so many dollars it would lead us to hyperinflation. So is U.S. debt a safe haven? No. Temporarily, can you put your money there and be relatively safe in terms of they're not going to default? Sure, but once they get to default status, they're going to have to print, and it's going to lessen the value of the dollar and of the debt itself, and so you don't want to be heavily invested in that market. So this is another stupid article by CNBC on what safe havens are, and this is just something that you really don't want to listen to. In terms of Japanese yen, that's not really safe either because the Japanese have had stagflation for 2 decades. They do not have a strong market. Traditionally, the yen has been seen as somewhat of a safe haven in times of turbulence, but I would argue the dollar is stronger. However, I don't think either the yen or the dollar are particularly strong, historically speaking, against themselves. They both have weakened against themselves, so I think the safety of any fiat currency at this point is really in question. I wouldn't really believe those reports. I think gold and silver are your better safe haven investments. I want to talk about what's going on across the world, and the Venezuelan crisis is basically just reaching epidemic proportions. You have Maduro really enacting hardcore socialism in that country. People are starving. They don't have food. They can't get products to market. The currency is hyperinflating. There are revolts against Maduro. Trump is basically supporting the alternative candidate. You have part of Maduro's army and diplomatic corps supporting the opposite candidate. The legitimacy of the elections are being called into question. And right here we have an article from BBC talking about Maduro given ultimatum by European leaders, where the European leaders are supporting the opposite candidate in the recent election. So it's just a big mess for Venezuela right now. And that's why, if you're thinking about socialism or communism for America, why you don't want to go there. Because what's happening in Venezuela has happened around the world so many times. Socialism and communism have never worked. It has destroyed countries. It has starved people. It has led to war. It has led to political conflict. And Venezuela is basically the poster child for that right now. Here's a video from Venezuela's military attaché in Washington, D.C., appointed by Maduro, announces allegiance to Guaido, who is the opposition candidate. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video, and we're going to listen to what he has to say.
Muy buenas tardes, pueblo de Venezuela. Le habla el coronel José Luis Silva Silva, agregado de defensa a la Embajada de Venezuela desde la oficina de la Agregaduría de Defensa en Washington, Estados Unidos de América. El día de hoy me dirijo al pueblo de Venezuela y en especial a mis hermanos de la Fuerza Armada Nacional con la finalidad de reconocer como único presidente legítimo al presidente Juan Guaidó. Esto basado y apegado a la Constitución de nuestra República, por la cual nadie, ninguna persona o institución puede estar por encima.
So basically what they're talking about is people that Maduro have appointed to diplomatic posts are basically revolting on him and saying, hey, you've taken this too far. You're starving the country and we don't support you. This is a real mess going on in Venezuela. And again, why you don't want to go to socialism, communism, it doesn't work. I know a lot of the young people in this country who basically have been indoctrinated by our current education system think socialism's the answer. The polls have stated that the young people in America think socialism's the answer. Look at Venezuela. It's not the answer. There are revolts. There are people starving. There's all sorts of stuff going on. You don't want socialism. And to make it worse, we have an article here on Zero Hedge that just recently came out today. The Bank of England refuses to release Venezuela's gold after U.S. lobbying. So Trump and the U.S. has started to get involved in Venezuela, and they're trying to put pressure on the Maduro regime. But what they're doing is limiting their ability to enact financial transactions, in this case, get their gold from the Bank of England. And what that's going to do is just going to make it harder on the Venezuelan people. Yes, this will make it harder on Maduro to enact his socialist policies because he'll have less money to support his regime, and it could undermine his regime and lead to a revolution and perhaps political change. And we hope that political change will be for the positive, although there's no guarantee of that occurring. There could be even more hardcore communist or socialist or despot that comes into power in Venezuela. There's no there's no guarantees there. But what it is doing is continuing to undermine the finance of Venezuela, and it's continuing to starve the Venezuelan people, which is not often talked about. The article here says that Bloomberg reports that Maduro's embattled regime, desperate to hold on to dwindling cash pile it has abroad, was stymied in his bid to pull $1.2 billion worth of gold out of the Bank of England, according to people familiar with the matter. Other stories that I've been following around Venezuela are that Maduro is using gold to buy goods and services such as oil, food, and other things to bring into Venezuela, because there are basically sanctions on Venezuela from other countries that are blocking their ability to interact in commerce with the fiat currency system, with the Venezuelan currency. So now they're turning to gold, and that's being blocked by the U.S. and European leaders, and that's really going to do nothing but make Venezuela into an even worse situation than it is. I also wanted to turn to Europe and show you a little bit of video from the Yellow Vests and their march in France and what's going on there. You're going to see here in a minute where the tear gas comes out to try to quell the Yellow Vest protesters as they march in France, protesting the policies of the government and Macron, who's a socialist. And they're attacking a bank ATM there, or a bank building there. Protesting the bank. And again, France is a very socialist country, Venezuela a very socialist country. You'll notice the socialist countries are all having problems at the same time for the same reasons. Why we don't want socialism in the U.S. So out comes the tear gas, disperses some of the protesters. A lot of them are smart in bringing their gas masks. So this video is by RT. It goes on quite a while, but I just wanted to show you basically what's going on. A lot of the mainstream news in the U.S. is not going to show these protests, but you can go onto YouTube and see hundreds of hours of videos on the protests. Is about 9 hours that were broadcast by RT. But there's a lot of problems with Macron's policies in France. It basically, the taxation that he's enacted on the people. The taxation is needed to support socialist policies of things like universal income, universal health care, so on and so forth. These things always break the little people first. And the people that are wearing the yellow vests are the everyday workers in France, and they're the ones protesting, saying you've taken it too far. We can't pay these taxes. We can't afford them. Also, there's another important happening that occurred between France and Germany, where Merkel and Macron signed a treaty that made a step towards the European army. So basically, they're trying to weaponize the military units of Germany and France together to basically serve as sort of a pan-European military force. And a lot of this could be used to quell domestic insurrection or domestic protest, as well as potentially lead the entire continent of Europe into a war, because that's what the military is for. It's to enact war. And this could be very dangerous because it questions the sovereignty of the individual nation states within Europe. If you get a European army, then the people in Brussels and the leaders of those countries can very easily enact laws and military actions against other countries and drag entire nations into war. This is not a positive development for Europe. It's basically the militarization of the European continent. Again, we're seeing what's happening in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America. We're seeing what's happening in Europe. This is not calm times, ladies and gentlemen. This is why you want to own gold and silver, and you want to have it in your hands. This article from Zero Hedge about the Bank of England not allowing Venezuela to have their gold. You as an individual do not want to have gold stored overseas. If you cannot get it in your hands, it's not going to help you in crisis times, as we're seeing in Venezuela. They can't get their gold when they need it. And if you see what's going on around the world with these protests, the world is not a calm place right now. There's a lot of angst going on in the world. There's a lot of inequality. There's a lot of protest, potential civil wars that may erupt of the people against their governments. And that's going to work its way back around to America. And what we have to do is be sensible and say we cannot allow the socialists to take over America, because if they do, this is exactly what we're going to see in our country. And this is reflected somewhat in the overall stock markets for the last several months, certainly since October of last year. All this worldwide uncertainty and the problems we're having in the U.S. So a lot of stuff going on right now, a lot of stuff that I've thrown at you. But now's the time when you want to make your move into gold and silver. That's why I started the website and why I started this channel, because I want people to be able to protect themselves. Gold and silver in your hands, in your possession, is the best way that you can financially protect yourself from what's going on in the rest of the world. If you have your money into the stock markets, you're at the mercy of what goes on not only in the U.S. markets, but around the rest of the world. That's going to affect these markets. It's going to affect supply and demand in worldwide markets. So gold and silver is really where you want to park your savings and not have it in these other markets as well. Anyway, that is the weekly market wrap-up. This is Rob for goldsilverpros.com, and this is January 27th, 2019.
This has been a Gold Silver Pros production. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and sign up for our newsletter on goldsilverpros.com.